Hello, I'm Ronnie Eldridge. Welcome to Eldridge and Company. I've been interested in how the city regulates the taxi industry ever since my young friend, Ed Rogoff, wrote his dissertation about it some 35 years ago. So who better to talk to about the furor caused by the recent influx of these ride-hailing services than Professor Edward Rogoff, the Distinguished Dean of LIU Brooklyn School of Business, Public Administration, and Information Services. So welcome.
Thank you.
I've always followed it, and I've always thought of you.
Yeah, thank you. It's good to be here.
So you early objected to the way the taxis were regulated in the city.
Right.
But now, how do you feel? You must be exasperated.
Well, I feel it's a little bit like I've been involved in this industry long enough to see the future come to be the present. The taxi cab industry was born of technology. I mean, it started because of the invention of the gasoline-powered car. It was named because a meter was invented in Europe and it transferred to the US, and it became an industry. And we've seen technology come and go in it over the years. I mean, you may recall there was a time when people tried to put radio hail services into taxi cabs, and the city objected to it because they were charging more and they were not accepting street hails. And so the industry has changed a lot over the years, and it only makes sense that technology, which has infected and affected every other part of our lives, would reach the taxi cab industry. So
the taxi cab industry, though, is regulated.
Yes.
I mean, this is a big transportation system. It's an important component, isn't it, of city life?
It's a hugely essential component, and many people rely on it for all kinds of reasons.
Yeah.
They can't use the subways, they're disabled, they're in a hurry, they're out-of-towners.
They used to be in a hurry.
They used to be.
Now.
And now they rely on taxi cabs, and taxi cabs do, I think, 600,000 trips a day. So it's it's right up there with buses in terms of providing.
I think I read that the system in New York is like the 4th largest transportation system in the country.
The taxi cab industry?
Yeah, taxis and livery cabs and all that.
Oh, I think it's probably the largest.
The largest.
Probably the largest.
So what it started with, the regulation started as a result of too many cabs on the...
Exactly.
Yeah.
So in the Depression, so this really goes back, the origin of the Medallion System is in the Depression. Up until the Depression, you could buy a cab license for $10. The city didn't have a cap on them. They issued as many as people wanted. And the number bloomed to more than 21,000. And come the Depression, there were many more cabs than were necessary. There were wars between cab companies. There were literally murders over taxi cab issues. And so during some very long, complicated story, but the bottom line was that LaGuardia signed a law in 1937. It said, we'll never issue another taxi cab medallion. And no one ever thought that these would be worth more than $10. Of course,
they gave them to all the different licensed taxi.
All the people who owned them could keep them.
Had a license, they got the medallion.
And they got them, and it was perpetually renewable. So they had it for life and beyond, and that was it. And they never thought it would be worth more than $10.
So they came up to being worth $1 million or more.
$1,200,000. They peaked.
Right. It seems to me the other big regulatory change, and I may be wrong about this, but when it allowed a medallion owner to lease out the car.
Absolutely. So this was during the Giuliani administration, was that they allowed, instead of being employees of companies, they allowed them to lease, which is a very bad system. I mean, it's really like urban sharecropping.
Yeah.
And so you pass all the risk on to the driver. He pays a fixed price to lease the car and the medallion, and he's taking all the risk as to whether or not he has enough business to make money. So it's a very, very bad
And it created a whole new part of the industry, right?
Absolutely.
So before it was a garage that housed the cars.
Right, right.
And that they paid different benefits.
Yes, they would, so the workers were unionized workers. They received benefits.
They split the money that came in.
They basically split 50-50 with
the driver kept the tips.
The driver kept the tips, and
it was a good middle class job. I mean, it was reasonable.
It was a reasonable. You got many people who did it for a pretty long period of time, and it was possible for an individual at that time to actually buy his own medallion, which for years has been off limits. So, it's really become an entry-level job into American society, more than it ever was. So people who can't get any other jobs drive a cab. They don't like it. They do it only for as long as they need to until they can do something else.
So they now have to pay the owner of the medallion like $130, I think it's up to like that.
A shift. Yeah.
Then they have to pay for the gas.
Yes.
And do they have to have their own insurance?
No.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. So all of that was going along.
Yeah.
And a lot of these brokers that then handled sales of medallions and finance sales, so they were making a lot of money.
Yeah, so the medallion, basically the system worked for the benefit of the medallion owners, and over time the industry's regulators, the Taxi and Limousine Commission and the City Council, sort of took it on as a badge of good performance that medallion prices went up. So they would say, we're here to support strong medallion prices. This really didn't make any sense to me. They should be supporting good service for cab riders. That was not really their agenda. And so they made all kinds of regulatory changes, including allowing leasing that benefited the medallion owners to the detriment of the drivers and I think the public.
The public, because it raised the fares.
Absolutely. And they would raise the fares to make all this happen.
Yeah. So the only fare, I guess they recently, or a couple of years ago, raised the fare, but that increase was supposed to go to the driver?
Yes, they said that it's extremely difficult to enforce that. Yeah. Extremely difficult.
And then they added a surcharge for the MTA.
Right.
So the passengers really, it's not run for the common good of the passengers.
No, I would not say that's the top of their agenda. Yeah.
So now we have these new companies.
Right.
So what do we say about them?
Well, I think this remains to be figured out. I mean, this technology is brilliant. It's easy. It's simple. It makes sense. It uses street space efficiently, which is really what's scarce in New York is street space. So I think it makes sense.
What do you mean by that?
Well, there's no shortage of cars. There's no shortage of drivers, but we really have a shortage of street space. So when things get too crowded, we get congestion. And that's really the negative impact and that's really what regulators should be trying to minimize is congestion and to increase efficiency of the system. Well, Uber and its competitors are extremely efficient users of street space because you can track where cabs are, you can get one when you need it, the drivers know exactly where the business is, so this minimizes that dead time between when the cab is not occupied. So these are brilliant systems. People like them, drivers like them, and I think the ultimate resolution of this is you'll see these systems migrate into yellow medallion cabs. Now it may not be Uber, it may not be Lyft, it may be some other system, but there are many. Uber has lots of competitors, big, well-funded companies as well.
But we go back to the street space. Yeah. That's in opposition to what the council and the mayor recently said. Didn't they say that the congestion was caused by the appearance of these new cars? Right.
This is really not accurate, right? The drivers who are driving with Uber are largely drivers who were driving for other companies, either black car companies or radio call dispatch companies, of which there are hundreds, mostly outside Manhattan. So they're not really putting all that many new vehicles on the street. That doesn't seem to me to be the case. I think they're really just taking drivers from other uses, other systems, and moving them into this, which is probably a good thing.
So we really can't look at this without looking at the general, as you said, street space.
That's right.
So it seems to me we need to limit the number of private cars that come into the city.
Right. So this is really a pricing issue and an access issue. Many other cities in the world do this. Is you have systems like Easy Pass that basically say if you're going to drive, say, Manhattan south of 96th Street, you pay a charge to do that. And really the pricing for vehicles, and Uber does this itself, is that it has surge pricing, which makes a lot of sense as well, is that we're a supply and demand economy, and when the demand is very high, the price should go up, and that would reduce the number of vehicles on the street.
What about the bike lanes?
Yeah, well, I think...
And what about these new, turns and all these other traffic conditions?
Right. Well, there's no way this doesn't hurt congestion, or make congestion worse. The bike system is sort of portrayed as a mass transit alternative, but it really isn't. It's really a pleasant way for basically people who are hyper fit, I think, to get around. And of course, it adds to congestion. There's no question, and it takes up a lot of parking spots as well.
It isn't an urban-friendly thing, I don't think.
No, I think, bicycles.
Yeah.
I think bicycles have a place, but it's really at the end of the mass transit system. It's not to compete with the mass transit system. So I could see at the end of the subway lines having bike stations. This is what you see in European cities, is people ride bicycles to the train.
Commuting, yeah.
And then they commute in on the train. That I think would make more sense in New York than trying to integrate it into traffic-ridden Midtown.
I want to go back. You felt it was a mistake, didn't you, with the issuance of medallions?
Oh, in
early times?
In early times, yeah.
Did that set the whole industry off on a different path?
Absolutely. And it's a completely unintended effect. No one who voted for that law on what was then called the Board of Aldermen thought it would have any kind of effect like this. They just thought they were doing the best they could to reduce congestion.
So how do you get out of the medallion system?
It's a tough, really, really tough. So I think one thing you do is you have to have a really long-term plan in place. So you say, in 30 years, these medallions expire. And it's hard for anyone to argue that this would really hurt them. They could have a lifetime of earnings off of whatever they own, and and then over time they would decrease in value. The fact that they've gone down in value greatly now is probably a good time to do that, because they're worth much less now than they were 3 years ago. So,
and the future can only be, they're not going to rise again the way they did.
Well, if the city allows Uber or a system to go into taxi cabs, then you'll see them come back up.
So if they set a limit, that means they're going to do another issuance of different kinds of medallions?
It'd be very difficult for them to issue more medallions. The law really doesn't allow that to happen. It would be tied up in court for many years.
A third of the medallions are owner-operated.
Yeah, not really.
No.
That was, when the law was passed, it was about 50-50. But the move to the leasing system and the city loosened up, during the Giuliani administration, loosened up those rules, so that the chances that when you hail a cab, you're getting an owner-driver is very, very small.
Because I always feel sorry for them.
The owner-drivers,
I'm concerned about them.
Yeah.
I'm not concerned about the industry that grew up around the other people.
Of course.
And it's interesting to see, the whole thing started, whatever it was called, the Hack Bureau.
The Hack Bureau.
The Hack Bureau. Started because of corruption.
That's right.
Right?
Yeah. No,
Mayor Walker, huh?
Right. You're absolutely right, Ronnie. Mayor Walker, had an early retirement because he had accepted a gift of bonds from a taxi cab company in exchange for promising them the exclusive franchise to operate cabs in New York. And that led to this rebound effect of, well, we want to make sure there are individual medallions, and we want to protect the medallion owners from evil trust creators for the taxi cab industry. So, that of course is an interesting story. Mayor Walker got caught up in that. And
now, though, we see also the relationship between big donors to political campaigns.
Absolutely.
And medallion holders.
Absolutely. These, the big medallion owner groups are, wealthy people with strong economic interests. And they've learned about political contributions, and they're active contributors to political campaigns. And it mucks it up, because it doesn't necessarily mean that a candidate or a public official is supporting a certain position because they got money. Right. But it certainly makes it look as if they are. Exactly. So the perception is just as bad as the actual thing. Exactly. So when the administration decided they were going to limit the cars, that was the immediate cry. Right. Exactly. Yeah. It's something. It's a very complex problem now. Yeah. So this is called the shared economy?
These other
Uber and these things are shared economy businesses.
So let's talk about that.
Yeah.
That's good for an entrepreneur, right? That is entrepreneurship.
Absolutely, it's entrepreneurship.
Which is what you specialize in.
Right, it's what I teach and write about. And these, of course, represent hugely successful entrepreneurial ventures. And I would say Uber sort of moved out of that class, now is a giant company with huge value. But there are a lot of competitors. There's a lot of companies coming into this space. And I think it's really way too early to say who's going to win. I don't think we have to anoint Uber as the winner of this competition.
So let's forget Uber and let's just talk about the general shared economy.
Yeah.
This is all happening because of the internet, right?
It's all technology driven. It's all technology driven. So we're all part of a big network, and entrepreneurs say, how can I make this work? So gee, let's go out for brunch. Let me find a website that's going to steer me to somebody who has a special on brunch on Sunday morning, and we can go to brunch. That's a business. And there are thousands and thousands of these. Of course, most of them never get too far. There's certainly very few of them reach the level that Uber's reached. But
they provide living. They provide incomes for comfortable living.
Sometimes, and they provide innovation, and they improve our economic efficiency, and they employ people, and they are the engine of economic growth, not just in the U.S., but around the world.
Are they what we would call, some of them called small business?
Many of them are small business. Of course, many of them are called small business. Many of them qualify as small business. New York is filled with dozens of incubators that have hundreds, thousands of these small businesses at the early growing stages. It's a great thing about New York. New York is a very rich environment for them to start in. There are so many qualified people here in all fields. There's access to capital. There's access to markets. You can start a business very inexpensively, very efficiently in New York. And this is the present and the future for the New York economy.
So how did this all start? I mean, somebody got this brilliant idea about the internet?
Somebody got a brilliant idea. I mean, basically somebody created, a lot of people created things, small chips, a network, cell phones, smartphones, one thing led to another.
Can we pinpoint where it began?
I don't think, there are people who claim credit for starting the internet other than Al Gore, but I don't think you can say one thing person started it. It was a change in technology overall. It was really semiconductors, I suppose.
Yeah. I worked at CBS when I was young. And I worked there in 1952, which was the first time they did a computer with elections. It was the UNIVAC. Yeah. 2 rooms of equipment. Right. And it wasn't even right.
That's right.
Because they kept changing it.
Right. And today your smartphone has much more power than that computer
amazing.
It's incredible what this age has created.
So what's the profile of an entrepreneur?
There is no profile of an entrepreneur. A lot of people think, these are young men, very ambitious, hard driving.
Women? Not as many?
There are not as many women, but there are many, many women, and the number of women entrepreneurs is growing. Basically, this is actually one thing that's been studied very well is there a personality profile for entrepreneurs? And the answer is no. So anybody can do this. You need to have a little bit of insight into yourself. In other words, what part of this can I do? What part of this do I need to recruit other people to build a team? Entrepreneurship is a team sport, and you need to build that team and function as a productive team. So everybody can do it. You see success. You would not pick Bill Gates out of a lineup as, say, this guy's going to be a successful entrepreneur, but he was. And he was good at what he did, and he recruited people who were good at what they did. And he built a successful, an enormously successful business, obviously doing that. And the same is true for everyone starting today. And I would add, New York just has great resources for entrepreneurs. And so it's possible to find other people to fill out your team, to be partners with you, to provide the resources you need to build your business. It's also a great entry point into American society. People who start businesses. My grandparents, came from Russia on one side, Poland on the other, and they came to New York in the early 20th century. What did they do? They opened stores. The equivalent of them today would be somebody who started a website business. And this is also, you know, we sit here in a CUNY facility. This is one of the great roles that CUNY serves in New York, is to help integrate all these folks and to provide them with the tools to, you know, be the next Bill Gates, and if not, to be at least very successful.
I remember they used to say more women were becoming small business owners because they had more trouble with the large corporations, with rising.
Yeah, I think that, you know, there's some truth to that, I think, that, you know, there's a lot of flexibility, so, you know, women who might be more focused on family issues, they can do a business on a part-time basis. They can do it from home.
Flexible.
It's much more flexible. There's some of that. So I think, you know, the gap between men and women entrepreneurship has gotten smaller. I think it'll continue to get smaller.
And is it also an entry level for other people who are not part of the established moving forth?
Absolutely. So I think
do we see more minority? When are we ever going to change that expression?
Yeah, that's a whole other question. You know, it's interesting. I did a study about minority entrepreneurs, and, you know, people really have many stereotypes that are wrong. Minority entrepreneurship is a big thing. Mexican Americans are among the most successful entrepreneurial groups in America, so the image of, you know, Mexicans coming to the U.S.
The Donald Trump.
Yeah, sort of corrupting our economy is really, you know, hardly the case.
What kind of businesses do they start?
They do everything. They do everything. And Mexican Americans in particular do a lot of multi-generational, they've done a lot of multi-generational businesses. So because Mexicans have been immigrants to the U.S. for a long time, they've been here, you know, long enough to have started businesses, to pass them down to their children and grandchildren. During that time, those businesses have grown to big heights. So, you know, African Americans, you know, have fewer financial resources. They tend to start smaller businesses. But entrepreneurship is an extremely important way for African Americans as well to move up economically. And I think you're right. I think those groups that traditionally have not done well in, say, Fortune 500 companies, entrepreneurship is a good alternative for them to create a good future.
So we don't have a characteristic about it, other than...
We should not. We do. People think about it.
Yeah.
They think sort of that...
Creative a little bit?
Maybe.
You have to be creative to come up with a thought.
Not really. A lot of entrepreneurs, you know, they replicate someone else's idea. I mean, you know, I met someone, a student of mine, whose family owned laundromats. They did very, very well. It's not easy to run a laundromat. You know, you have to have employees, you have to be good to your customers, you have to manage the machinery, you have to understand zoning rules. Is it creative? Not really, but you have to be, you know, just copying an existing formula. But they were successful, and I admired them for what they brought to that situation to make it so successful.
Does the student then plan to go into the business?
Yes, and rightly so. You know,
Yeah.
rightly so. You know, it's a good business. It's opportunities for growth. It's got this student's her strength was she can come into this business and show her family how to integrate technology into this, right? So now you can go, this is, you know, you can go into a laundromat and you can check on your phone, are there machines available, before you make the trip of schlepping your laundry down the street.
Amazing.
And so, you know, this integrating technology, even in mundane businesses, is an important thing.
So that's a whole new opening, isn't it?
A whole new opening.
For the next generation.
Absolutely.
Of family. You know, I always thought that was the best legacy you could leave, right?
Yes.
Your own business. I was always sorry that I couldn't start a business. I'm still trying to think of one, but it's not. But then it's so interesting. Then the younger generation, who's so smart on the internet, comes in and just expands and adds all these additional things.
Absolutely, and builds competitive advantages and builds a future for these companies.
So we're coming to the end of this, but let's go back to the taxi.
Yeah.
Do you think we're going to work this out?
Yes.
How?
I think, you know, right now cabs are not allowed to use Uber or other ride-sharing apps. I think eventually the Taxi and Limousine Commission and the mayor, maybe not this Taxi and Limousine Commission, but I think eventually this technology will move into the taxi cab industry, and these cabs will get a new life with new technology.
So the medallion won't make a difference, other than to the worker.
Right. So this is going to be this will be an issue for the city. Is are they going to limit where they can pick up, say, on a ride-sharing app to a certain geography. Right, the most valuable real estate in New York for the taxi cab industry is Midtown Manhattan, or Manhattan south of 96th Street. Are they going to say only Medallion cabs can pick up there? Now, there's a precedent for this. Green cabs, which service the outer boroughs, they're not allowed to pick up in Manhattan. And so maybe they'll.
That's a state law, right?
It's a city-supported, city-state law, right? But this is, I think it'll work out, and
sometimes in the court, it seems to me.
It'll certainly spend time in court. It'll spend time in the political system. It'll probably go through environmental reviews. It'll be a long process. But in the final analysis, what I believe is that technology always wins, and the technology of ride-sharing will find its way into these cabs.
We've done this whole program without even talking about Airbnb, but we'll come back to that another time.
Okay, another time.
So thank you very much, Ed Rogoff.
My great pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If there are any people you'd like to hear or topics you'd like us to explore, please let me know. You can write to me at CUNY TV, 365 Fifth Avenue, New York, New York, 10016. Or you can go to the website at cuny.tv and click on Contact Us. I look forward to hearing from you.